Here we are, ready to take Bluebook Practice Test 8, Reading Writing Module 2, the easier one. Now, what I'm going to do in order to get there is I'm going to skip through all of Module 1, and I'm just going to purposely put in the wrong answers. And I encourage you to do the same thing. So for instance, if you want to purposely see the easier module 2, then you can put all wrong answers into module 1. If you want to see the harder module 2 for any of these tests, whether it be for math or reading writing, go ahead and find online what the answers are and go ahead and enter those in, and you'll get the harder module 2. So that allows you to kind of practice on the Bluebook app according to your ability levels. So let's go ahead and start here with question number 1. So predatory animals differ widely in how they blank food for their young. Some leave dead prey nearby, some bring back live prey, and some feed their young directly from their own mouths. So I might say deliver food to their young, not how they acquire it, because we're talking about how they give the food to their young. So you always want to answer in your own words. And so to avoid, to guess, those are different. To provide, that's similar to delivering the food, and describe is also different. So the answer here is going to be C. And number 2, one challenge of generating electricity from ocean waves is that wave power isn't blank. It varies in unpredictable ways that pose technological and planning problems. So wave power isn't stable because we hear later that it varies in unpredictable ways. It's unstable. So by the way I'm reading where I'm not getting every single word, that's the single biggest thing you want to practice, both for SAT and also for getting yourself ready for college, because this is one of the differences between people who succeed a lot more in school and at work, and people who don't, is your ability to kind of make sense of difficult verbiages and difficult reading in general. And the way to really do that is by realizing that not every word has the same value as every other, and you can trust your internal ability to kind of pick out which words are important. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's definitely a skill you want to practice. So we're looking for stable, and accidental is maybe a little different than that. Confident, expensive, and consistent. Well, that is similar to stable. So we'll pick D right there. And now we're going over to number 3. For this painter, being blank was an important part of the artistic process because he paid close attention to all the details of his neighborhood. His artwork captured nuances in the beauty and vitality of the Black experience during a certain time period. So he paid close attention, all the details. He captured every little nuance, which is a detail. And so I might say observant. He's observing every little detail. And that perfectly matches one of the answer choices. Not skeptical, which is like sort of cautious or cynical. Critical is criticizing something. Or confident is something else as well. So observant is perfect right there. And now we're going over to number 4. In this year, this magazine published several articles based on letters exchanged between Lincoln and a woman. Historians were unable to blank the authenticity, however, and quickly dismissed them as a hoax. So they were unable to sort of prove whether they were authentic. So let's say prove or maybe even confirm. And let's look at the answers. Validate is to prove or confirm. Interpret is kind of maybe interpret a different language or some code. To relate is to connect things, and to accommodate is to make something work or make something fit. So A, validate, that fits perfect for what we were saying. Now we're going to question number 5. In 2007, this scientist was working on converting printed books to a digital format. He found that some words were distorted enough that digital scanners couldn't recognize them, but most humans could easily read them. Based on that finding, he invented a security test to keep bots out of websites. The first version of this test asked users to type one known word and one of the many words scanners couldn't recognize. Correct answers proved the users were humans and added data to the book digitizing project. So here we're hearing about how reCAPTCHA, which is a popular security test, came about. So the main purpose to discuss the invention of reCAPTCHA. That's pretty good. To explain how digital scanners work. They were in the passage, but it wasn't the main purpose. To call attention to the book digitizing project. Once again, in the passage, but not the main thing. And to indicate how popular reCAPTCHA is. Once again, in the passage, but not the main thing. And so the answer here is going to be A. And we're going to 6. So here, the text is adapted from this novel. This uncle was as loud as my father was quiet. Even when he wasn't talking, he made a lot of noise, clearing his throat and sniffing and tapping his fingers. So all about how loud the uncle was. And we need the function of the underlined sentence, which is this one right here. Uncle was as loud as my father was quiet. So it's kind of giving us the main idea that uncle was loud and also comparing to the father. So let's see if either of those are an answer. A, it lists the kind of topics the uncle enjoys. No, it was just the fact that he was louder than the father. B, it suggests that he dislikes meeting new people. I don't really see anything to that effect. And C, it contrasts the uncle with the father. Well, that was one of the two things we said in our own words when we were doing this. So let's keep that one. And D, it describes a conversation between the narrator and his father. Well, there's no specific conversation. So then the answer here can be C. And going on to number 7. So what would the paleontologist in text 2 say about the initial thought in text 1? So I'm in a situation like this going to want to read text 1, understand it so that I can kind of follow and figure out what text 2 would have said after that. So a tiny fossil in a piece of amber is of the extinct species being named. This fossil consists of a skull with a thin snout and a large eye socket. Because these features look like they're avian or related to birds, researchers thought that the fossil might be the smallest avian dinosaur ever found. And what would text 2 say about that? It says they were excited to discover a second small fossil that's similar to the one that was mentioned in the last text, but has part of the lower body along with a bird-like skull. Detailed studies of both fossils revealed several traits that are found in lizards, but not in dinosaurs or birds. Therefore, paleontologists think the creatures were probably unusual lizards, even though the skulls looked avian at first. So what would text 2 say? Text 2 is sympathetic that they looked avian at first, but it's found out that they're probably just unusual lizards. So let's start reading the choices. What would text 2 say about text 1? It's understandable because the fossil does look like it could be related to birds. Well, that is said right here, so we'll keep that. B, text 2 would say text 1 is confusing because it isn't clear what caused the researchers to think it might be related to birds. It didn't say anything about the possibility that the other thesis was confusing. C, it's flawed because the researchers mistakenly assumed that it must be a lizard. Well, text 1 mistakenly assumed that it was a bird, not a lizard. D, reasonable because the skull is the same size as the skull of the second fossil, but is shaped differently. There's nothing anywhere in here that says that it was shaped differently, so we can't keep that one. And so the only answer choice that we didn't find anything wrong with was A for number 7. And going to number 8. So here we have an 1891 novel. Dorian Gray is taking his first look at a portrait that Hallward has painted of him. Dorian passed listlessly in front of his picture and turned toward it. When he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. He had never felt it before. So, what are the emotions we're seeing? He had pleasure. He recognized himself for the first time. He had wonder. He had a sense of his own beauty. So he clearly loved the portrait. So A, he wants to know Hallward's opinion. I didn't see anything like that. B, he's delighted by what he sees. That makes sense. C, he prefers portraits to other types of paintings. Maybe, maybe not, but none of that was mentioned. And D, he's uncertain of Hallward's talent. Again, maybe, maybe not, but definitely not mentioned. And so the answer that remains here is going to be B. And now let's go to number 9. Okay, here we have an 1811 novel. Eleanor lives with her younger sisters and her mother. Eleanor, the eldest daughter, whose advice was so effectual, possessed a strength of understanding, a coolness of judgment, which qualified her, though only 19, to be the counselor of her mother, and enabled her frequently to counteract, to the advantage of them all, the eagerness of mind in Mrs. Dashwood, which must generally have led to imprudence. Imprudence is acting without wisdom. So she's correcting Miss Dashwood's lack of wisdom, her mother's lack of wisdom. She had an excellent heart, the daughter. Her disposition was affectionate and her feelings were strong, but she knew how to govern them. It was a knowledge which her mother had yet to learn, and which one of the sisters had resolved never to be taught. So Eleanor had all of these qualities. She had strength, judgment, she gave advice, um, she had a great heart, she was affectionate, strong, she knew how to govern it all. There was just so much, so many good things here about the eldest daughter. So, what is true about Eleanor? She often argues with her mother. I didn't see anything to that effect. B, she can be overly sensitive. It sounds like she's perfectly sensitive because we're only hearing good things about her. C, she thinks her mother's a bad role model. Maybe, maybe not, but it wasn't mentioned. And D, she's remarkably mature for her age. That makes sense because she was even giving advice to her own mother. Um, right here, she would counteract to the advantage of everyone the eagerness in the mother's mind. So she gave her own mother advice. So the answer here is D. And now we're going to number 10. Why are ecologists worried about Pando? Utah is home to Pando, a colony of quaking trees that all share a single root system. Pando is one of the largest single organisms by mass on Earth, but ecologists are worried that its growth is declining, in part because of grazing by animals. The ecologists say that strong fences could prevent deer from eating young trees and help Pando start thriving again. So, why are they worried? Because the growth is declining. Now, the number of trees is not declining, just the rate at which it's growing. So, A says it isn't growing at the same rate it used to. That sounds great. B, it isn't producing young trees. Well, that wouldn't be possible because the deer are eating young trees. So, it must be producing young trees. And C, it can't grow into new areas because it's blocked by fences. Well, no, here the fences are a good thing. The fences are going to prevent the deer from eating the younger trees. So the fences are not a problem, they're an advantage. And D, its root system can't support new trees. There was really nothing to that effect here. So the answer for 10 is going to be A. Now we're going over to 11. We need to use data from the table to complete the statement. What's the statement? Researchers found that relatively few video games released over the decades remain available today. For example, 14.22% of games are still available that were initially released in, well, where's the 14.22 here? Right here. Those are games that were initially released in 95 to 99, which is answer choice B for 11. Now we're going to 12. At what depth does the southern stoplight loosejaw live? So right here is the southern stoplight loosejaw, depth below the surface, 500 to 2000. And the description says these are the depths at which they live. So 500 to 2000, which is answer choice C for number 12. Now we're going to 13. So here we have a novel Cather portrays Alexandra Bergson as having a deep emotional connection to her surroundings. Which quotation effectively illustrates that claim, that she has an emotional connection to her surroundings, to her natural surroundings? A. She had never known before how much the country meant to her. The chirping of the insects down in the long grass had been the sweetest music. She felt as if her heart were hiding down there somewhere with the quail and the plover, all the little wild things that crooned or buzzed. Under the long, shaggy ridges, she felt the future stirring. So this is all about her connection to the nature there. So we'll at least save that one for later. B. She talked to the men about their crops and the women about their poultry. She spent a whole day with one young farmer who had been away at school and who was experimenting with a new kind of clover hay. She learned a great deal. So she was talking to a lot of people and learning, but there's nothing about her love for the nature. Who knows why she's learning? Maybe just because she wants to make money there. C. She drove off alone. The rattle of her wagon was lost in the howling of the wind, but her lantern, held between her feet, made a moving point of light along the highway, going deeper and deeper into the dark country. So here's something that happened, that she went deeper and deeper into the country, but not necessarily because she loved the country. D. It was Alexandra who read the papers and followed the markets, who learned by the mistakes of her neighbors. It was her who could always tell how much it cost to fatten each steer, and who could guess the weight of a hog before it went on the scales. So this is saying that she has incredible abilities, but it's not talking about her emotional connection to the land. So the answer here for number 13 is A. Now we're going to 14. Here we're being asked, we need to use data from the table to complete the text. And what's the text saying? For a school project, a student needs to recommend a maple tree that is native to North America. So that's just these three, and won't grow more than 60 feet in height. That's these three, because these are the maximum heights. So which one had them both? The red maple did, which is going to be answer choice C for this question. Okay, next. In his 1963 exhibition, this artist showed how television images could be manipulated to express an artist's perspective. Today, that person is considered the first video artist. Well, we're talking about today, so it's the present tense, which is good here, but not here. And this is the future tense. And this is kind of like a past tense. So the only one that's in the present tense is D for dog here. So 16, in this novel, this author uses poetry rather than prose to tell the story of this folk hero. So she uses poetry rather than prose to tell this story. So we're landing on D here just by sounding this out. Now going to 17. This classic children's board game is a version of an ancient game. In both games, players encounter good or bad spaces while traveling along a path. Landing on one of the good spaces allows a player to skip ahead and arrive closer to the end goal. So, what is the thing that's doing the work in this second part of the sentence? Landing. ING words are not verbs, they actually function as nouns. So, landing on one of the spaces allows a player to skip ahead. One thing allows, multiple things allow. So if landing were a plural word, then D would be the answer. And we're also in the present tense, by the way. Lots of present tense all throughout here. This is a version players encounter. This allows a player to skip and arrive closer to the end goal. So the answer here is going to be A. Now we're going to 18. In winter, the diet of snow monkeys are influenced more by food availability than food preference. Although the monkeys prefer to eat vegetation and invertebrates, those food sources may become unavailable because of extensive snow and ice cover, causing the monkeys to hunt for marine animals in any streams that have not frozen over. First of all, you want to make sure to always read these all the way to the end. Sometimes, if you don't make it to the end, it sort of reads differently than it should. But what I'm noticing is that we have a dependent clause right here. Although the monkeys prefer to eat vegetation and land-dwelling invertebrates. A clause has a subject and a verb. So the monkeys prefer. So if the monkeys prefer something, I can put a period. But if I say, although the monkeys prefer something, the word although is a weak conjunction that makes this a dependent clause, and dependent clauses can't stand on their own. Neither can modifiers. So clauses have subjects and verbs. So the monkeys prefer. But if you're missing a subject, verb, or both, particularly at the beginning of a sentence, then it's a modifier. And that's this part right here, forcing the monkeys to hunt for marine animals in any streams that have not frozen over. Now, we know that that part there has to be a modifier because we have an independent clause in the middle part. And you can't connect an independent clause to another independent clause unless you have a semicolon or a comma fanboys. So from the beginning, there was this feeling like that blue part had to be a modifier. Meaning that it can't start with a subject-verb combination. So for instance, if right here it says, this causes the monkeys, so this thing causes, that's a subject-verb combination, then this would be an independent clause. But causing or forcing, that's a modifier because ing and to do words are not verbs. And you need a subject and a verb to be a clause. So let me just read this with C in place. Although monkeys prefer to eat vegetation and land-dwelling invertebrates, those food sources may become unavailable because of extensive snow and ice cover, forcing the monkeys to hunt for marine animals in any streams that have not frozen over. So you can see how good it sounds in place right there. And let's go ahead and go to 19 now. The Alvarez theory, developed by this physicist and his son, maintained that the secondary effects of an asteroid impact caused many dinosaurs and animals to die off. But it left unexplored the question of whether unrelated volcanic activity might have also contributed to the mass extinctions. So, like I said a moment ago, you have to make sure to always read to the end. But semantically, in terms of the meaning, we need a but here because this theory confirmed one thing, but it left unexplored something else. So really, we want one of these. And if you have two independent clauses, you need a semicolon, John jumped, semicolon, he fell, or a comma and a fanboys. John jumped, comma, and he fell. Fanboys' words are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So that's being fulfilled by B, comma, fanboys, comma, but. So that makes sense to have an independent clause both before and after something that can be its own sentence. And that's exactly what we have here. So the answer here is going to be B. And we're going to number 20 now with 9 minutes left. Not too bad. Okay, in the 50s, this man was struggling to keep his business afloat when his sister-in-law advised him to repurpose the product, a non-toxic clay-like substance for removing soot, as a modeling putty for kids. In addition, she suggested, who was it? His sister-in-law. She suggested selling the product under a child-friendly name, Play-Doh. So we're talking about this person and this person suggested doing something. We're in the past tense and we're talking about a single person doing something. So in addition, Zufall suggested selling it under a child-friendly name. So the answer to 20 is A. And now we're going to 21. This term derives from Latin and means bent back, an apt descriptor for the branch of consonants pronounced with the tongue curling up in the back of the mouth. In many languages, including English, these consonants are rare, but in some dialects, however, four such consonants are relatively common. So we're seeing in the part before the blank that in other languages, these things are rare, and we're seeing after, in some dialects, they're actually common. So I wouldn't mind seeing a but in between. But what we're definitely seeing is two independent clauses, because we have actually, let me use a different color pen. In many languages, these consonants are rare. So a modifier followed by an independent clause. And moving forward, in these other dialects, however, those are two modifiers, four such consonants are relatively common. So we have two independent clauses. We kind of ignore the modifiers, but we have two things that could each be their own sentence. And for that, we can use a semicolon or a comma fanboys. So the answer here is going to be D. And 22. There are three basic steps you should follow when planning a scientific inquiry. First, research the question you want to answer. Second, come up with a prediction about the answer to the question. Third, develop an experiment. So second just has to be the answer there because we have first before it and third after it. So the answer here is D. And now we're going to 23. In 1933, this amendment was ratified. It mandates that presidential inaugurations be held on January 20th, 10 weeks after the November election. In addition, it requires newly elected U.S. senators and representatives to be sworn into their offices on January 3rd. So right here, I can see that we're hearing one stipulation of the amendment, and in addition, a second one. So in addition is absolutely perfect for this question. Now we're going over to 24. At 2 weeks old, the time their socialization begins, wolves can smell but can't yet see or hear. Dogs, on the other hand, can see, hear, and smell by the end of 2 weeks. So I'm looking for on the other hand, and the answer that kind of matches that is C, by contrast. Accordingly, by the way, it's kind of like a therefore. This happened, accordingly, it caused that to happen. So the answer here is going to be C. And 25, some members of the Supreme Court have resisted calls to televise court's arguments, concerned that the participants would be tempted to perform for the cameras and lower the quality of the discourse. In addition, the justices worry that most viewers would not even watch the deliberations, only short clips that could be misinterpreted and mischaracterized. So it sounded to me like an in addition because we're hearing one worry, and in addition, we're hearing the second worry. So that is answer choice B for this one. And for 26, we're going to invent our own word. Roughly once an hour, boiling water shoots up 100 feet or more from this geyser, a cycle seemingly inhospitable to life. But as this person attests, the geyser is almost like a cradle for biodiversity, home to numerous bacteria species. So in the first part, it seemed like it was inhospitable. It wasn't friendly to life. But in the second part, it was like a cradle for biodiversity. So definitely a contrast. That's why we want to pick C. Still, although it seems this way, still, it actually did take care of a lot of life. And that's answer choice C for that one. And now for number 27, our last one, the student wants to explain an advantage of the infilling technique. So let's see if there are any answers that are definitely not explaining an advantage. A, to remove carvings, power grinding is not always feasible. That's a disadvantage of power grinding, which is not the same as an advantage of infilling. B, filling in carvings with ground sandstone and a bonding agent is less invasive than smoothing them away, which can alter or damage the arches. So less invasive, that sounds like an advantage. Let's keep that one for now. And C, park rangers can use a power grinding technique to smooth away carvings or fill them in. So this is just what they can do. It's not an advantage or a disadvantage. And D, as methods for removing carvings, power grinding and infilling differ in their level of invasiveness. So that's not specific enough to be an advantage or a disadvantage. So the only answer that had a possibility of being right here was answer choice B. And we've made it to the end. Let's check that we got an answer for everything. And let's confirm that we did okay here. Let's see if we got them all right. And here is the score report. Let's see how we did here. As you can see, we omitted everything. in Reading Writing Module 1, because like I said, we wanted to get to the easier version of Module 2. And here are our answers to Module 2. Safe and sound, 100% correct. And we hope you enjoyed this tutorial video on SAT Test 8, Reading Writing Module 2, Easy. Have a great day.